Centuries ago, in the shadowed recesses of a world where dragons ruled the skies and humans toiled below, an unholy agreement was forged. It was a time when dragons, majestic yet fearsome, commanded dominion over every mountain, valley, and sea. Their fiery breath could scorch armies, and their scales shimmered with an unearthly glow, a brilliance that was both mesmerizing and terrifying. The pact was born out of desperation. A human king, whose name was lost to the ashes of time, had grown weary of the dragon's wrath. His kingdom, a sprawling realm of fertile fields and grand castles, had been reduced to rubble by their fiery onslaughts. Crops burned to blackened stalks, rivers boiled into steam, and the cries of his people haunted his nights. It was said the king's madness began the night he saw his youngest daughter turned to cinders by the sweeping tail of a crimson dragon. In his despair, the king turned to an ancient sorceress known only as Nithara. Legends whispered that Nithara was born of shadow and flame, her soul entwined with the abyss. Her price for aid was unspeakable, a fragment of the king's soul and his lineage bound to her service for eternity. Desperate to save what remained of his kingdom, the king agreed. Thus, under the blood-red glow of a lunar eclipse, the pact was sealed. Nithara summoned the dragons to a cavern deep within Ember Peak, a place so shrouded in darkness that even sunlight feared to enter. There, amidst the echoing roars and the pungent stench of sulfur, she offered the dragons a choice: peace with humanity, governed by strict boundaries, or eternal torment, bound by her sorcery. The dragons, arrogant in their power, laughed at her threats. Yet, as she uttered incantations in a tongue older than time, the air grew thick with an unnatural chill. Shadows writhed like living creatures, and from the void emerged figures, spectral beings with hollow eyes and talons sharper than any dragon's claws. These were the Forsaken, spirits of dragons long dead, bound by Nithara's dark magic. They howled in torment, a sound so dreadful that even the mightiest dragons recoiled. The pact was forged not in ink, but in blood and shadow. Each dragon's fiery heart was bound to a secret vessel hidden by Nithara. Should any dragon violate the terms, their vessel would shatter, condemning them to an eternity as one of the Forsaken. The humans too were bound, forbidden to hunt dragons or trespass on their sacred lands. For centuries the pact held. The skies, once ablaze with dragonfire, grew tranquil. Yet the cost of this fragile peace was steep, for Nithara's pact had cursed the land. Crops withered unnaturally, shadows grew longer than they should, and whispers of unseen creatures echoed through the forests at night. The king's descendants, marked by Nithara's curse, bore hollow eyes and pale skin, shunned by their own people. The dragons, though spared from humanity's arrows, lived in constant dread. They could feel the Forsaken in the corners of their minds, a lurking reminder of their fate should they stray from the pact. They became reclusive, retreating to the highest peaks and darkest caverns, their once proud roars reduced to mournful echoes. But nothing bound by darkness could remain unbroken forever. The seeds of rebellion, both among dragons and humans, began to take root. The night the pact began to crumble, the winds carried a haunting tune, a melody that would herald the end of an era. And the night the dragons died. The first sign came as a whisper on the wind, a sound that crawled into the minds of both man and dragon alike. It was faint at first, like the distant wail of a child lost in the night, but it grew steadily louder until it became a chorus of disembodied voices. The whispers spoke in no discernible language, yet their meaning was unmistakable, a warning of doom. In the human villages, elders awoke screaming from fevered dreams of burning skies and endless shadow. Farmers found their crops twisted and blackened overnight, the ground beneath their feet riddled with cracks that bled a foul-smelling mist. Even the animals were not spared. Cows gave sour milk, and flocks of birds took to the air in terrified bursts, only to drop lifeless from the sky. Far above, in their craggy lairs, the dragons sensed it too. The stars, their ancient guides, began to shift. Constellations that had shone unchanged for millennia flickered and warped, as though unseen hands rearranged them. The brightest of all, the dragon's eye, pulsed like a dying ember, its light fading with each passing night. Among the dragons, the eldest and wisest, known as Vorin the Eternal, convened a gathering. From across the lands, they came to Ember Peak, their massive wings darkening the skies. But even this gathering was cloaked in unease. The dragons, who had once bellowed in pride and fury, now whispered among themselves, their voices trembling with an emotion they scarcely knew: fear. "The stars speak of our end," rumbled Vorin, his voice as deep and ancient as the mountains themselves. His scales, once golden, had dulled to a tarnished bronze, and his eyes glowed faintly in the dim light of the cavern. "The pact is unraveling, and with it our fates are entwined with the shadows." "But how can this be?" snarled Malak, a fierce and impatient crimson dragon. "The pact was sealed by Nithara herself. Her magic binds us all." "Not all," interrupted Vorin. He lowered his head, his great horned brow furrowed. "There are whispers of betrayal among us. A dragon who has found the vessel that holds their heart, and seeks to destroy it." The cavern erupted in chaos. Roars echoed against the jagged walls, their fury shaking loose stones that clattered to the ground. Dragons accused one another, their eyes glowing with mistrust. The air grew thick with heat and tension, the ground trembling beneath their massive claws. As the dragons bickered, a deep, guttural laugh echoed through the cavern, silencing all. From the shadows emerged a figure neither dragon nor human. Its form was a grotesque amalgamation of the two. A hulking beast with the body of a dragon, but the twisted, shriveled face of a man. Its eyes were empty pits, oozing black ichor. "I am the harbinger of what you fear," it rasped, its voice a chilling blend of gravel and malice. "Nithara's pact was never meant to last. She saw the greed in your hearts, the hatred in your souls. She bound you in chains not for peace, but for her amusement. And now, her game ends." The creature raised a clawed hand, and the cavern grew unnaturally cold. From the walls, shadows began to writhe and take shape, their forms stretching into ghostly figures, the Forsaken. They screamed in agony, their cries filled with a torment so profound that even the bravest dragons recoiled. Above them, the dragon's eye flickered one final time, and then vanished, plunging the world into an unnatural darkness. The stars themselves seemed to weep, their light dimming as if the heavens mourned what was to come. In the villages below, the humans huddled in their homes, staring at the sky in terrified silence. The air was heavy with dread, every breath feeling like it carried the weight of death. Children wept, their cries muffled by the trembling hands of their parents. The winds carried the scent of ash and blood, though no fires burned yet. The warning in the stars was clear to all who dared look. The dragon's era was coming to an end, and with it, the fragile thread of peace that bound the world. The ancient winds howled through the jagged peaks of Ember Mountain, carrying with them a chorus of distant wails that no living creature could produce. The air itself felt heavy, thick with the taste of iron and ash, as if the mountain bled its sorrow into the atmosphere. The dragons, summoned by their elder, Vorin the Eternal, gathered in reluctant unity. Their silhouettes carved shadows against the clouded moon, their eyes glowing like dying embers in the night. Each dragon arrived with a sense of dread, their once proud wings now heavy with the burden of the unknown. Vorin had called them not with his voice, but through a pulse that resonated deep within their hearts, a thrumming sensation that felt less like a summons and more like a death knell. The great cavern of Ember Peak, a colossal chamber of blackened stone and jagged stalactites, was lit by the faint, eerie glow of molten rock far below. The dragons assembled in a circle around a central platform, their collective presence making the very mountain tremble. It was a place of power, one that echoed with the memories of countless dragon councils, though none had been convened under such grim circumstances. As Vorin stepped into the center of the circle, the silence was oppressive. His tarnished scales glinted faintly in the dim light, and his once mighty form seemed frailer than ever. Yet his voice carried a weight that demanded attention. Brothers and sisters, he began, his tone grave, we stand on the precipice of annihilation. The murmurs among the dragons were low but charged with fear. Some whispered prayers to forgotten gods, while others cast accusatory glances, their instincts sharpening into distrust. Vorin raised a claw to silence them, his amber eyes piercing the gloom. The stars have spoken, the forsaken have risen, and the pact that has bound us for centuries crumbles with every passing moment. Nithra's magic, our chains and our protection, is failing. From the shadows of the circle emerged Malak, the crimson-scaled dragon, whose temper was as fierce as his fire. He spat flames into the air, their light casting flickering shadows on the cavern walls. If the pact fails, then so be it, he roared. Let the humans cower and burn beneath our wrath once more. Let the forsaken howl. What power do they hold against our might? His words were met with a mixture of growls and murmurs of agreement, but Vorin's growl silenced them all. It was not a sound of fury, but of sorrow, deeper and more unsettling than any roar. Malak, your arrogance blinds you. This is not a matter of human rebellion or the forsaken alone. The very fabric of our existence is unraveling. Nithra's curse was woven not only into the pact, but into us. If it fails, our fire will falter, our wings will weaken, and we will become prey to the darkness she summoned. The gathered dragons recoiled at the thought. They were creatures of power and pride, the apex of all beings. The idea of their strength failing, of becoming vulnerable, was anathema. Before anyone could respond, a deep, unnatural laugh reverberated through the cavern, a sound that twisted the air and sent shivers through even the bravest dragons. From the blackest corner of the chamber, a figure emerged, a shadowy specter cloaked in the form of a dragon, but its shape was wrong. Its limbs stretched unnaturally, its wings ragged and torn, and its eyes were hollow pits that oozed darkness. Vorin speaks the truth, the creature rasped, its voice a mixture of a dragon's roar and something unholy. The pact was never meant to protect you. Nithra wove her curse into your very souls, and now it festers, ready to consume you all. The dragons roared in defiance, their flames lighting the cavern in bursts of gold and crimson. Yet the creature was unfazed. It stepped forward, its hollow eyes locking on Vorin. Even you, Eternal One, feel it, don't you? The weight in your chest, the weakness in your wings. The end is near, and no council, no pact, no fire can save you. Vorin stood his ground, his gaze steady, despite the unease that rippled through the chamber. "Who are you, Shadow?" he demanded. "What claim do you have to speak of our fates?" "I am Korath," the creature replied, its voice dripping with malice. "One of the first forsaken. Nithra bound my soul when I defied her will, and now I am her instrument of destruction. I come not to warn you, but to savor your fear. Your time has come, dragons. The pact will shatter, and with it, the last of your kind." With a chilling laugh, Korath dissolved into the shadows, leaving the cavern cold and silent. The dragons, stunned and fearful, looked to Vorin for answers, but he could offer none. The gathering at Ember Peak had not brought unity or hope. It had only confirmed their worst fears. The night the dragons would die was fast approaching. The events of Ember Peak left the dragons in turmoil, their confidence eroded and their once mighty pride reduced to brittle fragments. But even as they scattered to their lairs, fear twisting their thoughts, a deeper treachery began to unfold in the shadows. For among them was a traitor, one who had long harbored a secret too dark for even the bravest dragons to confront. High atop a jagged spire of blackened stone, Malak the Crimson Dragon stared out over the ash-streaked horizon. His fiery eyes burned with a mix of anger and desperation. The stars above flickered unnaturally, casting the land in an eerie, shifting light that seemed to creep closer to darkness with every passing moment. Malak's thoughts churned. He had always been a creature of fire and fury, his soul ablaze with the need to dominate and conquer. The pact, with its restrictions and humiliating compromises, had chafed at him for centuries. To bow to Nithra's will, to live in fear of her accursed magic, it was a cage, one he despised with every fiber of his being. And now he had found the key to that cage. Deep within the heart of his lair, hidden beneath layers of volcanic rock and molten rivers, lay a secret he had guarded for decades: his heart vessel. A shard of crystal so dark it seemed to drink the light. The vessel pulsed faintly, a sinister rhythm that echoed in time with his own heartbeat. It was the core of his life force, bound by Nithra's ancient spell, and it was the key to his liberation. Malak had discovered its location by accident, years ago, during a fiery rampage across forbidden lands. There, in a ruined temple, he had stumbled upon a vault carved with runes that writhed and twisted like living things. Within the vault, he had found not only his own vessel, but others. Rows upon rows of crystalline shards, each containing the fiery essence of a dragon. It was a terrible and wondrous sight, one that had ignited a dangerous idea in his mind. If he could destroy his vessel, he could sever his ties to Nithra's magic. No longer would he be bound by the pact or haunted by the threat of the Forsaken. But the consequences of such an act were uncertain. The vessel held his essence, his power, his very soul. To shatter it was to gamble with his own existence, a risk that even Malak had hesitated to take. Until now. The whispers that haunted the winds, the warnings in the stars, and the shadowy creature that called itself Korath, they all pointed to one truth: the pact was failing, and the dragon's time was running out. Malak's rage, his desperation, overpowered his caution. If the world was to end, he would end it on his terms. But Malak was not alone in his ambitions. Unbeknownst to him, a smaller, younger dragon named Rhaenyra had followed him to his lair. Rhaenyra, with her obsidian scales and sharp, cunning mind, had always been one to observe from the edges of the council, her quiet nature often mistaken for timidity. But she was no coward. She had watched Malak closely, sensing his growing defiance, and had decided to uncover his secrets. As Malak descended into the depths of his lair, Rhaenyra crept after him, her movements silent as the shadows that clung to the cavern walls. She watched from the darkness as he approached the vault, his massive claws tracing the runes carved into its surface. "You've gone too far, Malak," she hissed, stepping into the faint glow of the molten rivers. Malak froze, his wings flaring in surprise before he turned, his fiery eyes narrowing. "Rhaenyra," he growled, "you shouldn't be here." "Neither should you," she retorted, her voice cold and sharp. "You think I haven't noticed your schemes? You've found your vessel, haven't you? And now you mean to destroy it." Malak bared his teeth, his chest rumbling with a low growl. "Stay out of this, hatchling. You can't begin to understand the forces at play." "I understand enough," Rhaenyra shot back. "Destroying your vessel won't save us. It'll doom us all. The Forsaken aren't just bound to the pact. They're bound to us. If you sever your link, you'll unleash them." Malak laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. "Let them come. I'll face them with fire and fury as a true dragon should. Better that than to cower beneath the weight of Nithra's curse." "You fool," Rhaenyra snarled. "This isn't just about you. If the Forsaken are unleashed, they won't stop with you. They'll consume us all. Dragons, humans, everything." Malak hesitated, a flicker of doubt crossing his face, but it was quickly replaced by anger. "Enough!" he roared. "I won't be bound any longer." Before Rhaenyra could react, Malak struck the vault with all his might. His claws shattered the runes, and the dark crystal containing his essence tumbled to the ground. For a moment, the air seemed to still, as if the entire world held its breath. Then the shadows came. They erupted from the broken vessel like a black tide, writhing and screaming with voices that pierced the soul. The Forsaken, freed from their bonds, poured into the cavern, their spectral forms twisting and contorting with malevolent glee. They swarmed around Malak, their hollow eyes burning with an unnatural light. Rhaenyra watched in horror as Malak's flames sputtered and died, his mighty form collapsing beneath the weight of the shadows. The last sound he made was not a roar, but a guttural, choking gasp, as the Forsaken dragged him into the abyss. And then they turned their hollow eyes to Rhaenyra. Rhaenyra's heart thundered in her chest as the Forsaken advanced, their hollow eyes glowing with an unnatural hunger. The cavern that had once been Malik's lair now pulsed with darkness, the air thick with the stench of decay and sulfur. Shadows writhed on the walls like living things, reaching for her with clawed hands made of nothingness. The Forsaken moved slowly, savoring her terror. Their forms were grotesque, twisted amalgamations of dragons and specters, their translucent wings torn and tattered, their bodies an unearthly blend of flesh and smoke. Their voices echoed in her mind, whispers layered upon whispers, each one dripping with malice. You will join us. Your fire will falter. Your soul will belong to the void. With a defiant roar, Rhaenyra unleashed a torrent of flame, her black and blue scales reflecting the inferno's light. The fire scorched the cavern walls, turning stone to molten slag and filling the air with searing heat. But the Forsaken did not recoil. They passed through the fire as if it were no more than a gentle breeze, their forms flickering but unscathed. Panic surged in Rhaenyra's chest. She took to the air, her powerful wings beating furiously as she tried to escape the encroaching shadows. The molten rivers below churned violently, as though even the earth itself feared the presence of these abominations. She darted through the labyrinthine passages of the mountain, her keen mind racing for a plan, a weapon, anything. But the Forsaken followed relentlessly, their movements fluid and unnatural. They oozed through cracks in the stone and poured out of the walls like black ink. Their whispers grew louder, pressing against her mind like a suffocating weight. Why run? Why resist? You cannot escape the shadow. Rhaenyra's path led her to a massive cavern deep within Ember Peak, a place she had only heard of in legends, the heart of the mountain. Here, a vast pool of molten rock glowed an ominous red, its surface broken by jagged obsidian spires that jutted up like the claws of some buried beast. The heat was unbearable, even for a dragon, but Rhaenyra pressed on, her scales blistering as she hovered above the seething magma. The Forsaken filled the cavern, their whispers now a deafening cacophony. They circled her like vultures, their hollow eyes gleaming with cruel anticipation. Rhaenyra's wings faltered, her strength ebbing as the shadows pressed closer. Desperation drove her to the edge of reason. She remembered Voron's words, the warning he had given at the council. The pact binds us all, and its unraveling will bring fire and shadow to us all. If the pact was failing, then the only hope of survival was to restore it, or to destroy the Forsaken entirely. And if the Forsaken were born of Nithara's curse, perhaps the fire that created them could also unmake them. Rhaenyra dove toward the molten pool, her claws outstretched. She plunged them into the magma, ignoring the agony that ripped through her limbs as the molten rock seared her flesh. With a roar that shook the mountain to its core, she began to channel her essence, the fire of her very soul, into the heart of the molten pool. The cavern erupted in light. Flames shot upward, twisting and writhing like living things, their colors unnatural and blinding. The Forsaken screamed, their forms flickering and writhing as the flames consumed them. Their whispers turned to shrieks of rage and pain, their once imposing presence now faltering. But the cost was immense. Rhaenyra could feel her strength draining, her fire dimming as she poured everything she had into the inferno. Her vision blurred, and her wings grew heavy. The Forsaken, though weakened, continued to advance, their forms flickering but still relentless. You cannot stop us. You will die with us. With one final, desperate surge of power, Rhaenyra roared louder than she ever had, her cry reverberating through the mountain and beyond. The flames erupted in a cataclysmic explosion, consuming the Forsaken in a blinding inferno that reduced them to ash and shadow. The cavern walls cracked and splintered, the heart of the mountain collapsing under the sheer force of her sacrifice. When the light faded, the cavern was silent. The Forsaken were gone, their whispers silenced forever. But so too was Rhaenyra. Her charred form lay at the edge of the molten pool, her scales blackened and her eyes closed. Yet even in death, her sacrifice had not been in vain. The Forsaken were destroyed, their curse broken. Far above, the sky began to clear, the stars shining brightly once more. The dragon's eye returned, its light steady and unwavering. The remaining dragons, scattered across the land, felt the change. They raised their heads to the skies, their hearts heavy with loss, but filled with a newfound hope. Rhaenyra's name would be remembered, her final roar echoing through the ages as a symbol of courage and sacrifice. The night the dragons died had claimed many lives, but it had also brought a chance for rebirth, a chance to forge a new era, free from the shadow of the past. The echoes of Rhaenyra's final roar reverberated across the lands, a sound so profound that even the deepest valleys and furthest reaches of the world seemed to tremble. High in the heavens, the dragon's eye, a constellation long regarded as the soul of their kind, shone brighter than it had in millennia, its light piercing through the remnants of the cursed night. But the dragons who remained were left to face the somber aftermath of a shattered world. At the heart of Ember Peak, the mountain was now a smoldering ruin. The once mighty lair of the dragons had collapsed inward, its molten core cooled and blackened by the intensity of Rhaenyra's sacrifice. The darkness that had once crept through the mountain had receded, but it left behind a haunting silence, a void that seemed to whisper of things lost forever. Voren the Eternal stood at the base of the mountain, his ancient body heavy with exhaustion. His golden scales, once radiant, were now dulled and cracked. He gazed up at the remnants of the peak with weary eyes, his heart aching for the lives lost in the chaos. The pact had been their bond, their curse, their salvation, and now it was gone. The death of the Forsaken had shattered the ancient magic that had bound the dragons to their shared fate. For the first time in centuries, they were free. But freedom came at a cost. The surviving dragons gathered in the shadow of the ruined mountain, their numbers few and their spirits fragile. Among them were hatchlings too young to understand the gravity of what had transpired, their wide eyes filled with fear and confusion. The elders, once proud and commanding, now stood solemn and unsure, their authority shaken by the events of the cursed night. "We are unbound," Voren finally spoke, his voice carrying the weight of centuries. "The pact is no more. Nithra's curse, her chains, they have been broken, but with them, so too has our unity been undone." The dragons murmured among themselves, their voices low and uncertain. They had been united not by choice, but by necessity, their survival tied to the magic that had both protected and enslaved them. Without it, the bonds that held them together now seemed tenuous at best. A young dragon, her silver scales gleaming faintly in the dim light, stepped forward. "What does it mean for us, Voren? Are we safe now? Or has this freedom unleashed something worse?" Voren's gaze softened as he looked at her, but the sorrow in his eyes remained. "The Forsaken are gone, their curse destroyed by Rhaenyra's sacrifice, but we are not what we once were. The magic that bound us also sustained us. Our fire, our strength, it will fade in time. We must adapt, or we will perish." His words hung heavy in the air, the gravity of their situation sinking in. The dragons had always been creatures of fire and power, their might unmatched by any other beings. But now, with their essence diminished, they were vulnerable. The world that had once cowered before them might now see them as prey. But not all dragons shared Voren's perspective. From the gathering stepped Crithar, a dragon of immense size whose blackened scales glistened like polished obsidian. His deep voice rumbled like distant thunder. "Why should we shrink away into the shadows? Even without the pact, we are dragons. The humans, the beasts of this world, they are nothing compared to us. Let them fear us once more. Let them remember the wrath of the skies." A few dragons roared in agreement, their pride rekindled by Crithar's words. But others growled in dissent, their wariness of conflict overriding any hunger for dominance. The gathering teetered on the brink of division, their fragile unity threatening to collapse entirely. "Enough!" Voren roared, his voice cutting through the din like a blade. The sheer power of his presence silenced the dragons, all eyes turning to him. "We cannot repeat the mistakes of the past. It was our arrogance, our pride, that led to Nithra's curse. To rule through fear is to sow the seeds of our own destruction. Crithar sneered, but said nothing, stepping back into the crowd. The tension lingered, but Vorin pressed on. "We must find a new way," he said, his tone softer, but no less resolute. "Our fire may fade, but our legacy does not have to die with it. Let us honor Rhaenyra's sacrifice by forging a new path, one not bound by chains or fear, but by wisdom and unity." A murmur of agreement rippled through the dragons, though it was clear that many still harbored doubts. But for now, they were willing to listen, their spirits too shaken to resist Vorin's guidance. In the weeks that followed, the dragons began their exodus. They left Ember Peak, scattering across the world to seek new homes and carve out new lives. Some sought the solitude of distant mountains, while others ventured into uncharted lands where the touch of Nithira's magic had never reached. The younger dragons, unburdened by the weight of the past, embraced the change with curiosity and hope. They became the harbingers of a new era, their eyes fixed on a future unshackled by the mistakes of their ancestors. But the elders, Vorin among them, carried the scars of their history. They knew that freedom was a fragile thing, easily lost to pride or fear, and so they resolved to act as guardians, not of fire or power, but of wisdom. They would guide the younger generations, teaching them the lessons learned through blood and shadow. The night the dragons died had not marked the end of their kind, but the end of an era. From the ashes of the pact rose a new age, one of uncertainty, yes, but also of possibility. And as the stars shone brighter than ever above the ruins of Ember Peak, the dragons took their first steps into a world remade, their hearts heavy with loss, but burning with the hope of what could still be. As the dragons scattered to the corners of the world, seeking refuge from the aftermath of their shattered pact, the winds whispered of a deeper curse, one that had been woven into the very fabric of their existence. Nythera, the ancient and enigmatic dragon goddess, had left her mark on them long before the rise of the Forsaken, and her legacy, like the embers of a dying fire, still smoldered beneath the surface. Though Rhaenyra's sacrifice had severed the Forsaken's hold, the magic that had bound the dragons to Nithira's will was not so easily undone. In the hearts of every dragon, in the very core of their being, lay the seed of a curse that had been planted long ago. And as the dragons embraced their newfound freedom, the shadow of that curse began to stir once more. Vorin, now the reluctant leader of the remaining dragons, felt the weight of this curse upon him, as if it were a constant, suffocating presence. He had hoped that Rhaenyra's final act would mark the end of their torment, but instead, it had only unearthed the ancient and forgotten truth. Nithira's influence was far from finished. It had seeped into the blood of every dragon, leaving an indelible mark upon their souls. At the edge of the world, in the dark and desolate land known as the Black Wastes, a dark storm gathered. The skies above churned with unnatural fury, crackling with twisted lightning, and the distant sound of thunder that seemed to shake the very earth. It was here, in this forsaken place, that the last remnants of Nithira's power stirred, her presence lingering like a vengeful spirit. The Black Wastes had long been avoided by dragons and humans alike, for it was said to be cursed, an area where the very air itself was poisoned by the twisted magic of a forgotten age. But now, it was the center of an awakening evil, one that was linked directly to the curse that still haunted the dragons. In the heart of this storm-ravaged land, a figure cloaked in shadow stood alone. It was a dragon, but one unlike any other. His scales were a dark, sickly green, as though the very essence of the earth had seeped into his flesh. His eyes burned with an unnatural, golden glow, and his wings were tattered and frayed, as though they had been torn by 1,000 storms. This was Korath, the forsaken dragon, the one who had whispered of the doom that awaited them all. He had once been a dragon of great power, a close advisor to Nithira herself, but his betrayal had cost him everything, and in his desire for vengeance he had forged an unholy bond with the Forsaken. Now, he sought to reclaim the power that had been stolen from him, and with it, bring about the rise of Nithira's final curse. Korath had not been idle since the fall of the Forsaken. He had gathered followers, dragons who were lost to madness or driven by the desire for power. These twisted souls had been touched by the curse that lingered in the blood of every dragon, their minds warped and their bodies deformed by the unnatural magic that flowed through them. But Korath's true goal was not just to gather an army of loyal followers. He sought the dragon's heart, a legendary artifact said to contain the essence of the first dragon, Nithera herself. The dragon's heart was believed to have been lost in the ancient wars that had ravaged the world long before the dragons had retreated into the shadows of their lairs. It was said to be the key to unlocking the full potential of a dragon's power, and with it, Korath believed he could resurrect Nithera and bring forth the final destruction of the world. As Korath made his way through the black wastes, his mind was consumed by visions of the past, of Nithera's whispered promises of power and dominion. She had been a goddess, a force of nature, and in the depths of his soul, Korath still hungered for the power she had once offered. But now, it was not just his own thirst for power that drove him. The curse, the legacy of Nithera's magic, had taken root in him, as it had in all dragons. It was a hunger, an insatiable desire for more. More power, more control, more destruction. In the quiet moments of his journey, Korath could feel the curse gnawing at him, pulling at his thoughts. It was a slow burn, a constant pressure that pushed him forward, urging him to do whatever it took to fulfill his dark purpose. And yet, despite his obsession with power, there was a flicker of doubt deep within him. He had seen what the Forsaken had done, the horrors they had wrought, and the death they had caused. Was this truly the path to salvation, or was it merely the final step in a never-ending cycle of destruction? As Korath approached the ruins of an ancient temple, the wind howled around him, carrying with it the scent of decay and ruin. The temple was a crumbling monument to Nithera's reign, its once grand walls now broken and shattered by the passage of time. But in the heart of the temple, nestled deep within the earth, lay the dragon's heart, hidden away, waiting for the one who would come to claim it. Korath entered the temple, his wings brushing against the jagged stone as he navigated the narrow corridors. He could feel the power of the dragon's heart calling to him, a pull that seemed to reach deep into his very bones. The walls of the temple were etched with ancient runes, their meaning lost to time, but Korath knew they spoke of the power that awaited him. At last, he reached the inner sanctum, where the dragon's heart lay in the center of a darkened chamber. It was a brilliant gem, glowing with an eerie light, its surface pulsing with the rhythm of a heartbeat. Korath stepped forward, his claws trembling with anticipation. But as his claws brushed against the heart, the ground beneath him began to shake. A low rumble echoed through the temple, and the air grew thick with an overwhelming sense of dread. The curse that had plagued the dragons for so long now reached its climax, its dark tendrils wrapping around Korath's heart. The dragon's heart was not a simple relic. It was a prison, a containment of Nithera's essence, sealed away to prevent her return. And as Korath touched it, the essence of Nithera surged back into the world, her presence overwhelming and suffocating. The curse was no longer just a shadow. It was a force of nature, alive and thriving. Korath screamed as the power of the dragon's heart coursed through him, his mind unraveling as Nithera's voice filled his thoughts. She was back. She was awake. And she was no longer the goddess she had once been. She had become something darker, more terrifying, and her thirst for vengeance could not be quenched. The curse had been passed on to Korath, and now, with the dragon's heart in his grasp, he would unleash the full wrath of Nithera upon the world. The world that had once been so peaceful, so vibrant, was now on the brink of annihilation. The dark storm that had been gathering in the black wastes finally broke, its fury spilling across the lands. It was a storm unlike any the world had seen before, a tempest of shadow and fire that swept through kingdoms, burning fields, drowning villages, and twisting the skies into a permanent twilight. Korath, now fully consumed by Nithera's cursed essence, stood at the heart of the chaos. His form had grown monstrous, his scales now an unholy mixture of blackened gold, pulsing with the taint of the goddess's malevolent spirit. The winds howled with the whispers of long-forgotten dragons, their souls trapped within the curse that Korath had unleashed. They clawed at the edges of his mind, urging him to be their vessel, their puppet. But Korath ignored their pleas, his thoughts consumed by Nithara's voice, which echoed through his skull like the rumblings of a distant storm. "The time has come, my child," she whispered, her voice both soothing and terrifying. "The dragons will rise again, and the world will burn beneath our wings." With every word, Korath felt his power grow. The dragon's heart pulsed within him, its energy fueling his every breath, every movement. The once proud dragon who had been cast aside in favor of power now stood at the forefront of a revolution, one that would reshape the world in Nithara's image. The first to feel the wrath of Korath's power were the humans. His minions, twisted dragons corrupted by Nithara's curse, descended upon their cities like a horde of vengeful ghosts. Villages were reduced to ashes in mere moments as the cursed dragons unleashed torrents of flame that turned entire towns into smoldering ruins. Cities that once stood as pillars of civilization now crumbled beneath the onslaught. No army could stand against the might of the cursed dragons, their strength amplified by the dark magic that flowed through them. Yet, it was not only the humans who were caught in the storm. The dragons, too, felt the weight of Nithara's influence, the ancient curse that had once bound them now threatening to tear them apart. Vorian, the eldest and wisest of the surviving dragons, knew that if they did not act quickly, they would be swallowed by the very darkness they had fought to escape. "We cannot wait any longer," Vorin growled, his voice like thunder as he addressed the remaining dragons. "Korath has awakened Nithara's curse in full. If we do not stop him, there will be nothing left of our kind, or any kind." The dragons gathered at the edge of Ember Peak, the ruins of their ancient home a stark reminder of the price they had paid for freedom. Vorin's eyes, once filled with wisdom, now gleamed with a resolve that bordered on desperation. They had no choice but to face Korath and his cursed followers in battle. The war that had been brewing for centuries was now upon them, and there was no turning back. "We must unite," Vorin continued. "The strength of one dragon will not be enough. We must combine our fire, our hearts, and our minds if we are to stand a chance." But even as he spoke, doubt crept into his heart. Could they truly defeat the corrupted dragon who had become the vessel for Nithara's wrath? Could they, the very creatures who had been bound by the same curse, rise above it and reclaim their world? The dragons flew to the four corners of the earth, rallying allies where they could. They reached out to the remaining human kingdoms, seeking their aid in what was now a battle for survival. The humans, though terrified, understood the gravity of the situation. Korath's wrath was not limited to dragons alone. The entire world stood on the edge of destruction. And so, the alliance was forged, a fragile bond between dragons and humans, born from necessity rather than trust. Together, they formed an army capable of facing the darkness that Korath had unleashed. But even as they gathered their forces, Korath's influence spread, his corrupted minions multiplying like a plague. The first battle of the war took place in the ruined city of Vorath, where the human armies, led by their bravest generals, met the forces of Korath's dragons in a clash that shook the heavens. The ground trembled as the cursed dragons descended upon them, their fiery breath scorching the earth and turning soldiers into ash. The humans fought valiantly, their weapons striking the dragons with precision, but it was clear that they were outmatched. Vorin and the remaining dragons arrived in the midst of the battle, their roars echoing through the air. The earth itself seemed to respond to their call as they unleashed torrents of flame upon Korath's minions, turning the tide of the battle. But even as they fought, the sense of dread continued to grow. The more Korath's forces were defeated, the more they seemed to rise again, as though they were drawn from the very shadows that had consumed them. It was at this moment that Vorin realized the true depth of the curse. Korath was not just leading an army of corrupted dragons, he was creating them. Every time a dragon fell, another would rise from the ashes, born from the curse that Nithara had planted in their blood. The battle seemed endless, a cycle of death and rebirth that no one could escape. In the heart of the battle, Korath himself appeared, his wings dark and menacing as he soared above the battlefield. His eyes gleamed with madness, and his roar shook the very foundations of the earth. He was no longer the dragon he had once been. He was something more, something darker. Vorin met Korath in the skies above, their fiery breath clashing in a stunning display of power. The two dragons circled each other, their claws raking the air, their wings creating gusts that could level entire mountains. Each strike was a test of strength, a battle of wills, but Vorin could feel the power of the dragon's heart within Korath, and it terrified him. "Korath!" Vorin cried, his voice strained with the weight of their shared history. "This is not you. This madness, Nithara's curse, it's consuming you." Korath laughed, a sound that sent chills through the very air. "You think I have not embraced it, old fool? Nithara's power is beyond anything you can imagine. I will reign as the true king of dragons, and the world will burn beneath my wings." Vorin's heart sank as he realized the truth. Korath was beyond saving. The curse had already claimed him, body and soul. But there was still hope. The dragon's heart, though a source of great power, also held the key to stopping Nithara's resurrection. If they could destroy it, they could sever her hold over Korath, and over all the dragons. The battle raged on around them, but Vorin knew what had to be done. With a final, desperate roar, he lunged at Korath, his claws extended toward the dragon's heart. The two dragons collided with a force that sent shockwaves through the battlefield. The clash of their powers ignited a storm that ravaged the land, but it was Vorin who emerged victorious. With one final strike, he shattered the dragon's heart, and the light within Korath's eyes dimmed. The corrupted dragon screamed in agony as the power of Nithara's curse was ripped from him, leaving him hollow and broken. His wings faltered and his body crumbled to the earth below. But even as Korath fell, the damage had already been done. The war of shadows and fire had only just begun. The earth groaned in agony as the last of Korath's cursed form collapsed into the ashes beneath him. The battle had come to an end, but the scars it had left on the land were deep, deeper than anyone could fathom. The skies above, once filled with the rage of dragons and fire, had now fallen eerily silent. Yet even in this silence, there was an undercurrent of something far more ominous, something that lingered like a whisper on the wind. The curse had not been entirely defeated. Vorin hovered above the smoldering ruins, his heart heavy with sorrow. His wings, once powerful and vibrant, now seemed to sag from the weight of the world's destruction. The once proud mountains, where dragons had soared for millennia, lay broken and charred, their peaks obscured by the pall of smoke that still clung to the air. The very ground beneath them had been scorched, the land twisted and scarred by the flames of war. The people, both human and dragon, had fought valiantly, but the cost had been unimaginably high. And yet, even in this moment of devastation, Vorin could feel the faintest spark of hope. With Korath's fall, the immediate threat had been quelled. Nithara's dark essence was no longer able to fully manifest through him. The dragon's heart had been shattered, its power ripped from the land. But the echoes of Nithara's influence still clung to the world like a dark fog, refusing to dissipate. The curse, though no longer active in its most destructive form, still lingered in the hearts of the dragons. A seed had been planted in their very blood, one that would take generations to truly cleanse. Vorin turned to face the other surviving dragons, their numbers few, but their resolve strong. The dragons had been broken, both in body and spirit. They had faced unimaginable horrors and had lost so much. Their wings were heavy with grief, their hearts burdened by the weight of their shared history. But as they looked to Vorin for guidance, something unspoken passed between them, a silent understanding that they could not allow the world to fall to ruin. They were the last of their kind. the last of the ancient dragons who had once ruled the skies. It was their duty now to rebuild, to forge a future that was not defined by the mistakes of the past. "We have defeated Korath," Vorin said, his voice hoarse from the battle. "But the war is far from over. Nithra's curse may have been weakened, but it has not been erased. We must ensure that the dragons never again fall to such darkness." The other dragons nodded solemnly, their eyes filled with a mixture of fear and determination. They knew the task that lay before them. To rebuild, they would have to first heal. To heal, they would need to address the curse that had been passed down through the ages, a curse that had nearly consumed them all. As the dragons began to gather their strength and make plans for the future, Vorin felt the weight of the world pressing down on him. It was not just the dragons that needed healing, it was the land itself. The war had scarred the earth, and its wounds ran deep. Entire forests had been reduced to ashes, rivers had run red with blood, and the once proud cities of the humans now lay in ruins. But amidst the devastation, there were signs of hope. New life began to sprout from the charred earth. The winds, once filled with the stench of burning flesh, began to carry the scent of fresh rain. The sun, though dimmed by the lingering smoke, broke through the clouds, casting its golden light upon the broken landscape. The people, though weary, began to rebuild. They came together, dragons and humans alike, united in their shared struggle for survival. In the days that followed, Vorin traveled to the human kingdoms, seeking to rebuild the fragile alliance that had been formed in the heat of battle. The humans had seen the true power of the dragons, and though their fear was still present, they now understood the importance of unity. They had lost so much, just as the dragons had, but together they would forge a new world from the ashes of the old. It was during one of these meetings that Vorin encountered a young human warrior, a girl named Lysandra. Her village had been destroyed in the war, her family lost to the flames of Korath's rampage. But instead of succumbing to despair, Lysandra had become a leader in her community, rallying the survivors and inspiring them to rebuild. "We may never be able to undo the damage that has been done," she said to Vorin, her eyes filled with both sadness and resolve. "But we can rebuild. We can create something new, something better. A world where dragons and humans can live side by side, without the shadow of fear or war hanging over us." Her words struck a chord with Vorin. She spoke of hope, of healing, and of the possibility of a new beginning. And as he looked around at the world in ruin, he realized that she was right. There was still time. The world was broken, but it could be mended. For the first time in a long while, Vorin felt the weight of his burden lift, if only slightly. The curse of Nithra's legacy would not be easily vanquished, but it was no longer an insurmountable force. The dragons and humans, though scarred, still had the power to shape their future. Together, they could build a world where the mistakes of the past were not repeated, where the shadow of Nithra's curse would never again darken their lands. And so, the dragons and humans worked side by side to rebuild. The land, though scarred, slowly began to heal. The dragons, once feared and hunted, now became protectors of the world they had helped to save. Vorin, though weary, led them with the wisdom of 1,000 years, his heart finally at peace. The legacy of Nithra's curse had been shattered, and a new world, one of hope, unity, and healing, began to take root. The dawn of this new world was not without its challenges, but it was a dawn filled with promise. The dragons, once lost to madness and fury, now had a chance to reclaim their place in the world. And the humans, though forever changed by the horrors they had witnessed, stood beside them as equals, their hearts filled with the belief that together they could overcome anything. As the sun rose over the horizon, casting its light upon the earth, Vorin looked to the skies, his heart full of hope. The world had been broken, but it had not been destroyed. The dragons and humans had survived, and together they would rebuild. The curse of Nithera was no more. The dawn of a new world had arrived. The world, still in the throes of rebuilding, had found a fragile peace. The days following the fall of Korath had been filled with hard work, sorrow, and determination. Both dragons and humans had united under a common cause, one that was born of survival, but now began to blossom into something deeper, something that hinted at a brighter future. The earth, though scarred, had begun to heal, and life slowly returned to its once vibrant state. But beneath this fragile peace, something stirred. The world was not yet free of the shadow that had long haunted it, and the dark legacy of Nithera still loomed over their heads, as if waiting to strike. Though the cursed heart of Korath had been shattered, and the dragons had reclaimed their place in the world, there remained a hidden threat, one that had been buried deep within the earth, where the gods themselves dared not tread. Vorin stood upon the peak of Ember Mountain, gazing out at the horizon. The sun had set, casting long shadows across the land, but it was the moonlight that caught his eye. For the first time since the battle with Korath, he felt a coldness that he could not shake. The winds had changed, carrying with them an unsettling chill that raised the hairs on the back of his neck. There was something out there, a presence that filled the air with an unmistakable dread. The other dragons, who had been working to restore the ancient sanctuaries and protect the human settlements, had sensed it too. The tension that had been building for weeks was now palpable, like the calm before a storm. The world was holding its breath, waiting for the inevitable. Vorin's thoughts turned to Nithera. Though she had been defeated in her physical form, her influence had never fully waned. It was said that even the most powerful of gods could not be entirely destroyed, and Vorin feared that the goddess of darkness had not yet played her final hand. And then the vision came. In the dead of night, Vorin found himself in the midst of a dream so vivid, so real, that it felt as if he were standing at the gates of the underworld itself. He stood alone in a vast, blackened wasteland, the ground beneath him cracked and desolate. In the distance, a figure approached, cloaked in shadows, its form shifting like smoke. As it came closer, Vorin's heart clenched in fear. It was Nithera. Her presence, though distant, was suffocating. She was not fully manifested, not yet, but her influence was undeniable. Her voice echoed in Vorin's mind, cold and mocking. "You think you have won, old dragon?" she hissed, her voice like the rattling of chains. "You have only delayed the inevitable. The world will burn, and you, like the rest of your kind, will be consumed by the fire." Vorin's wings fluttered in defiance, but his heart was heavy. He had known this day might come, but he had hoped, foolishly, that it would not. The curse of Nithera was not a thing that could be destroyed. It was a force of nature, a malignant presence that had seeped into the very fabric of the world itself. Even now, as the earth healed, her power slowly grew, drawing strength from the very shadows that clung to the corners of the realm. "You will never be free of me," Nithera continued, her laughter like the howling wind. "The darkness is eternal, and it will always find a way to return. Your world will fall, just as the dragons did before." Vorin's resolve hardened. He would not allow her to win. Not again. When he awoke, the dream clung to him like a wet shroud. His mind was clouded with dread, but he knew what he had to do. Nithera was not merely a god to be vanquished. She was a force that could not be destroyed. Her power was eternal, and as long as the shadows existed, she would continue to haunt the world. Vorin knew that the only way to stop her was to imprison her, to bury her in a place so deep, so hidden, that even her whispers could never escape. But where could such a place exist? The answer came to him in a rush. Ember Mountain, the ancient stronghold of the dragons, the very place where the curse had been unleashed upon the world so many centuries ago, was also the place where it could be bound forever. But the mountain had changed since the curse was first cast. It had grown darker, its very bones twisted by Nithera's influence. The earth beneath it was poisoned, and even the dragons themselves felt its unnatural pull. Vorin gathered the remaining dragons together, calling them to the mountain's peak. The winds howled around them, but the dragons stood firm, their eyes filled with determination. This would be their final battle, one that would determine the fate of the world. The time has come, Vorin said, his voice solemn and heavy with the weight of their shared history. Nithara's darkness has returned, and we must put an end to it once and for all. The curse of our kind, the curse of the world, will be sealed here. The dragons nodded, their faces grim. They had already given so much, and now they were prepared to give the last of their strength to ensure the world's survival. Together they gathered their powers, their flames merging into one single devastating force. The air around them crackled with the intensity of their energy as they channeled all of their might into the very core of Ember Mountain. It was a delicate, dangerous task. The mountain's heart had once been a source of great power, an ancient nexus of magic and life. But now it had become a prison, one that held not only the world's salvation, but its doom. The ground beneath their feet trembled, the mountain groaning in protest as the dragons worked to bind Nithara's influence once more. It was a battle of wills, a struggle between the ancient power of the dragons and the dark, relentless force of Nithara's curse. Every ounce of their strength was required, every breath a struggle against the oppressive darkness that threatened to consume them. And then, in the final moments, it happened. The ground beneath the dragons cracked open, revealing a deep chasm that seemed to stretch down into infinity. From the depths of the earth, Nithara's voice echoed, fierce and triumphant. "You cannot seal me away forever, dragons," she screeched, her voice filled with malice. "I will return, and when I do, your world will burn once more." But Vorin's eyes were filled with resolve as he released the final surge of power. With one last, tremendous roar, the dragons sealed Nithara's essence deep within the chasm, locking her away for all eternity. The darkness that had once threatened to consume the world was finally contained. As the earth trembled and the winds died down, the dragons collapsed to the ground, exhausted but triumphant. The curse had been broken, the world saved, for now. But Vorin knew that the battle against darkness was never truly over. It would return in time, just as the shadows always did. But for now, there was peace. The final reckoning had passed. The world had been saved, but the dragons, though victorious, would forever carry the scars of their past. They had faced the darkness and survived, but the price had been steep. And in the stillness of the night, Vorin stood alone, gazing at the stars. The battle was over, but the watchful eyes of the dragons would never waver. For as long as the shadows remained, they would stand guard, forever.